Welcome back. Locked On Gamecock podcast host and Gamecock Digest writer Andrew Lyon joining us now via Zoom. Andrew, let's dive into the Gamecock offense versus the Georgia defense. Starting up front, Carolina's offensive line, they bounced back after giving up 9 sacks to the Tar Heels as they only allowed 1 in the win against Furman. What's the likelihood of them replicating that performance against a Georgia defense that only has 1 sack through 2 games?
Well, Chandler, I'm not going to sit here and tell you there's no chance of them replicating that performance, but I do think that the percentage is pretty small because obviously comparing the Georgia Bulldogs to the Furman Paladins, the Bulldogs have far more talent than the Furman Paladins. No disrespect to them, but Kirby Smart, Glenn Schumann, Will Muschamp, all those guys, they're all defensive-minded coaches, and they have led pretty much a top 5, top 10 defense in Athens for the past several years running now. So this is going to be a much stiffer test for this offensive line. But again, like you said, this is a group that definitely improved against Furman last week. I think it was a performance that they desperately needed after what all happened in Charlotte against North Carolina. And so you give Dow Loggins and Lonnie Teasley an extra week to try to get some more issues worked out and try to maybe see if there's anything else schematically they can throw in there to try and alleviate some of those pass protection issues. I do think that they can at least maybe hold their ground against this Bulldogs defense on Saturday.
Yeah, Andrew, and despite the up and down play of the offensive line, QB1 Spencer Rattler has still been on one this season, right? He leads the SEC in completion percentage and is top 3 in the conference in passing yards and quarterback rating. We'll get to his targets in a bit, but sticking with Spencer, how do you feel he matches up against a Georgia secondary that is second in the conference in interceptions?
Honestly, Chandler, I think it's an even matchup between Spencer Rattler and that Georgia secondary. Georgia's secondary obviously has got a couple really good players like Kamari Lassiter and also a potential All-American back there at safety in Malachi Starks. But Spencer Rattler, look, he has shown over the last 5 or 6 games here at South Carolina that he is a guy that can absolutely torch a secondary if they are not prepared adequately for his skill set. And with the throws that he can make off schedule, rolling out of the pocket and sort of making plays happen that maybe aren't there originally, Spencer Rattler is going to be by far the toughest test that the Bulldogs have faced so far this season because they've played UT Martin and Ball State. And again, those are 2 teams that don't quite match up against the Gamecocks in terms of the overall talent they possess, especially at that quarterback position. So I think Spencer Rattler, he could definitely have another solid performance against this fellow SEC East foe on Saturday.
Yeah, for sure, Andrew. And I promised we would get to Spencer's receivers, so let's go ahead and dive into them. Xavier Legette leads all Power 5 schools right now in receiving yards with 296, but with Juice Wells and Omarion Brown still not 100%. I think the big question last week was who would step up in that room, and we saw a few guys step into the role that Juice and Omarion played, specifically Eddie Lewis, who had 6 catches for 89 yards against Furman. What are you hoping to see out of the receiving core against the Bulldogs?
Chandler, I'm hoping to see these receivers step up in their one-on-one matchups because this is going to be an all-hands-on-deck type of football game against the Bulldogs. I don't think South Carolina can win this football game and have Xavier Legette necessarily get the majority of their passing yards from Spencer Rattler. While Xavier Legette has been phenomenal the past couple of weeks, I do think that at this point, Georgia, they're going to start keying in on him a little bit more. And obviously, Juice Wells likely playing in this game as well, although still likely limited. They're going to be keying in on him as well. So you are going to have to find some more guys in that receiving core that steps up. Eddie Lewis was a guy that did so last week against Furman. And depending on the status of Omarion Brown coming into this game, he could very well be a guy that they're going to have to look to a little bit more in that slot position. And I mentioned it last week. I'll say it again. I think South Carolina's got to find a way to get these tight ends more involved. Trey Knox and Joshua Simon are 2 really good receiving targets at that position. And I think that for Spencer Rattler in this offense, if they're going to succeed in the pass game against Georgia, they got to find a way to spread the ball evenly all across the field, not just outside the numbers, but also over the middle of the field as well. And that's where Trey Knox and Joshua Simon have to both come into the fold there.
Andrew, we talked about the Gamecock offense versus the Georgia defense. Let's flip it. How do you feel the Gamecock defensive line matches up against a Georgia offensive line that Shane Beamer said Tuesday is filled with some dudes who will be playing on Sundays next fall?
Chandler, I think this is going to be the biggest matchup of the game right here. South Carolina's defensive line versus Georgia's offensive line. Obviously, Georgia's offensive line for several years now, they've had a massive reputation of being a very physical offensive line, a unit that is full of really good athletes for their size, guys that can move you around all over the football field. Now, From what I've heard so far over in Athens, it doesn't seem like the offensive line has been particularly all that great in terms of run blocking. They haven't been blowing people off the line of scrimmage like they're used to. That's something they're going to try to do a little bit more this weekend against the Gamecocks. But taking things back to South Carolina's side of things, the Gamecocks defensive line was another group that, again, saw a pretty decent jump in terms of improvement from week 1 against North Carolina to week 2 against Furman. If the Gamecocks are going to have a shot in this game, Chandler, they got to see some of their stalwarts step up here. Tonka Hemingway on the interior, a veteran leader like Alex Boogie Huntley, Jordan Stratton on the edge. They're going to have to be the guys that lead the charge in this matchup. And as I said at the beginning, I think this is the matchup that could very well decide whether or not the Gamecocks can remain competitive and potentially pull off the upset in Athens.
And we don't know much about Georgia quarterback Carson Beck because he's only made 2 starts, but we know a lot about the guys he's throwing the football to, particularly tight end Brock Bowers and receiver Dominic Lovett, a duo that torched the Gamecocks last year. 15 catches and 269 receiving yards combined between the two of them in their games against USC. Do you feel the Gamecock secondary can slow those guys down as well as the other Bulldog pass catchers?
Yeah, Chandler, this is definitely going to be another challenge here for South Carolina in terms of trying to match up against these guys. I think that the Gamecocks can find a way to slow down Dominic Lovett. I think considering the kind of offense he's in with Georgia compared to what he was doing with Missouri last year, I think that the defensive backs will be a lot less likely to maybe bite on some double moves and some of those switch routes that got them badly against the Tigers last year when Lovett was with them. As far as Brock Bowers is concerned, Chandler, I don't really think there's any way you can stop him. Brock Bowers is one of the best prospects in the entire country at that tight end position, likely a first-round draft pick, maybe a top 10 draft pick possibly this next April. So for South Carolina, I think the emphasis with him has got to be don't let him make things happen after the catch. Don't let him get a bunch of yards after the catch. Don't let him break tackles. Get him down as soon as he gets the football. If you could do that, again, you give yourself a better chance to stay in this football game. If you can't, then it could be another long day for that Gamecocks defense, which was the case last year when Brock Bowers came to Columbia.